Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
That business this year is on track to grow close to 5x. It's approaching cash flow positive. And so, but we didn't get there because we were geniuses, and we didn't get there because we were perfect. We got there because we made a lot of mistakes, we learned from the mistakes, we pivoted quickly, and we applied those lessons learned. So in a lot of ways, the things that I did wrong the first time allowed me to help other companies be more successful this time around. And so that's a long-winded way of saying that an entrepreneur that's willing to be introspective and look at what's working and what isn't will always be more successful.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Get ready for an awesome conversation. Ninad and I are so excited to welcome Ben Gordon, Managing Partner and CEO of Cambridge Capital, a private equity firm that invests in logistics and supply chain companies. Ben has done it all in the logistics space. He's built companies, he's sold companies. Since 2009, he's been advising and investing in logistics companies. He's been published and featured with logistics thought leadership in Fortune, Bloomberg, the New York Times, and CNBC, just to name a few. He has a bachelor degree from Yale and an MBA from Harvard. On top of this, he's also a really good guy that is committed to giving back to community, sitting on several nonprofit organization boards. Ben, it is an absolute pleasure to have you join us today, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be with you. Great to be with Ninad.
So coming out of the MBA program at Harvard, you decided to launch a web-based transportation management system company, not the type of solution many could probably understand or even know what it meant or what it did. And I'm sure your friends were saying, "What in the world are you doing, Ben?" You go through the process of raising $28 million in 3 rounds over 3 years. Then you make this pivot to the investment side. So wanted to see if you could share what that journey was like and how that influenced your decision to launch Cambridge Capital, which invests in the same space you started your first company.
So Dan, I appreciate that. And it's been an entrepreneurial journey for me, as it has been for you. But at heart, I'm somebody who likes building businesses. And for me, from the very beginning, it was in the world of logistics. So why did I start that way, and why am I staying there? Well, I guess it's in my DNA. My grandfather started a truck leasing company called AMI, and his grandfather started a horse and buggy business in New York in 1903, Morgan Sturt Express. So I'm 5th generation in this industry, and I can't say that I dreamed about trucks when I was a little boy or thought about logistics software, but what I realized was everything that I learned, and you mentioned some of the places I went to school, and Yale undergrad and Harvard Business School, and I'm a strategy consultant at a Bain spinoff called CDI. You consistently get drummed into your head, become an expert in something, be the best in a certain area, and find a way to help do it better. Well, what better place to start than an industry that I know or that you know? It's a large industry. There's over $1 trillion of supply chain spend in the U.S. It's growing. It's fragmented. There's lots of opportunity to take something important and then make it that much better. And my idea back in 1999, when I was still in business school, was I thought there was an opportunity to use this new technology called the internet in order to help automate parts of our business. And I remember sitting down with my grandfather to talk about AMI, the truck leasing business. And the discussion was, how do we do it now? And I remembered because I'd spent summer jobs working in the truck brokerage division, for example. Truck brokerage, when you're in dedicated contract carriage or truck leasing, it was a couple of guys in a room making phone calls to sell the backhaul, right? So
That's right.
Pretty
boiler room
pretty basic stuff. And so my idea was, hey, why don't we use the internet to help automate that? And the feedback I got was, hey kid, that's a nice idea, but don't worry, we've got it. And by the way, I had something else in mind, he said. What's that? Well, he was selling his company. So he sold AMI, and I figured, you know what, if you believe in your idea, you've got to go for it. So I ended up starting this company. We originally called it Shippers Exchange. Dan, you're now, among other things, a chief revenue officer, and I know you've got a lot of good marketing insights. You would have known if you looked at the words shippers exchange on the page that it was bad marketing. People thought that when they looked at the letters, it said shipper sex change. That's just how people's mind worked. So, not the right positioning. And we ended up changing it to threeplex because it was 3PL execution software. And as an industry guy, you would have looked at that and probably you would have said, yeah, that makes sense. But I remember going to Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, and everybody had the same reaction, which is, what the hell's a 3PL? So
Absolutely.
now the venture world, it's totally different. But back then, nobody knew anything about our industry on the VC side. And so, I struggled to get people to see the huge opportunity in logistics and the opportunity to use software to help make logistics even better. But eventually we got there. We did, Dan, as you pointed out, raise 3 rounds of capital, and ultimately we sold the business. It's now a tiny piece of IBM. But what I learned in that journey was, first of all, it's not what's in your head that matters, it's what the market thinks. In my head, first of all, I thought that we had this amazing software that was going to revolutionize logistics, and I underestimated how hard it was to change behavior because, this is true for any entrepreneur, but especially in our industry, you're dealing with mission critical software. People don't just want to turn off something else and change to you because you have something that's better. It's got to be 10x better in order to justify it, and you've got to be able to reassure them that you're not going to drop the ball, and that's such a big deal in our industry, right? I mean, it's that and I think your audience knows that. I didn't know that at the time, or I didn't appreciate how important that was, but that was important. And then finally, I also had a painful lesson about the difference between sales and marketing, okay? Because our marketing was great. Our marketing was, instead of trying to disintermediate the middleman, we were going to go to the middleman, the 3PL, and give that 3PL the technology so that they could be even more effective in going to their customer. And so the idea was, we're not here to disintermediate you, we're here to help you. And that was a great message, and they loved it. And by the way, it's still relevant today when there are digital freight brokers threatening to disintermediate and replace the so-called analog brokers. But easier said than done, of course. True then, true now. However, it turned out that was, for us, it was terrible sales. Why? Because at the time, and different now, but at the time, logistics companies were not eager to spend 7 figures on software. They kind of looked at us and said, hey, your software is great. If you can help me win a new customer and get the customer to pay for it, then great, I'll use your software. Well, that was, not really a blueprint for great sales success, and so we struggled, and it took longer than we wanted. And I think a painful lesson was that marketing doesn't equal sales, great message doesn't equal revenue, and you really have got to figure out what does it take to get that kind of traction. And ironically, we ended up getting more traction with this other little niche area in drayage. We built a drayage management system, and I couldn't have told you what drayage was, 2 years prior to that. But drayage, of course, it's vital. It's what happens when a steamship comes into a port, what happens next, the short haul trucking, the connects modes. And we ended up building a product that helped automate drayage and create an audit trail to track what happened, and when the drayage carrier shows up, how to start the demurrage detention meter running, and just being able to prove what happened when was a big deal. That ended up being the reason why Maersk bought the business and would end up selling it to IBM. And so, again, I think the lesson was what you think as an entrepreneur matters isn't necessarily what the customer thinks. So I had a lot of opportunity to learn, and coming out of that, we sold the business. And I thought, you know what? I had all these logistics CEOs coming to me and asking for advice. Why not listen to them? And so that's what led me to build an advisory business. So we started BG Strategic Advisors the next year, 2002. Things took off. We got to work with a lot of great people. Some of them, Dan, you know very well because we were just talking about them earlier, like Herb Shear from Genco, or Sid Brown from NFI, or Louis DeJoy from Newbury, now the Postmaster General. And so got to work with a lot of great people, and really, that's when things took off.
You said so many things there, Ben, that I think we could probably spend 7 to 10 hours on a piece. So I think what's really impressive about what you just talked about is you've actually walked the entrepreneurial life. And, when I think of, and we talk to a lot of founders and leaders in the supply chain tech space, those that have raised money, those that haven't, those that are maybe thinking about it for the first time. And I think what would be a great takeaway, because, I love that you've been on both sides of the fence, right? You've been a founder, you've been entrepreneurial, you got an idea, you turned it into a product, and you went to market, selling and marketing. What would be your advice for a founder today? Or maybe this is even how Cambridge Capital works. Like, what makes a really good strategic partnership between a founder or an entrepreneur and someone who's willing to cut a check?
Well, I think for starters, every founder believes in his or her idea. If you didn't believe in it, you wouldn't start the business. But the key is to realize it's not what you think, it's what the market thinks. And so I think I've had a chance to work with a lot of founders. I've been a founder 5 times. On the advisory side, we've worked now on over 50 deals. And at Cambridge Capital, or venture capital, private equity business, we've invested in 9 companies. So I've worked with a lot of great entrepreneurs. In my mind, the number one key for a successful entrepreneur, not just to raise money, but to build a business, is put yourself in the shoes of the market. And the market could be different. It could be, what does the customer think? What does the investor think? What does the strategic partner think? But you've got to really be able to put yourself in their shoes. If you can't, you're not going to succeed. And so I think that's vital. Number 2 is you've got to be good at recognizing what matters. And even though every entrepreneur has a story to tell, you can't believe your own bullshit. Okay. So, and I say that knowing that, look, I mean, I'm a founder, and I know, like, you've got to be able to tell a story and be excited about the story, but you need to know objectively how are you doing and what's working and what isn't working. And that means, number 1, surround yourself with people that tell you the truth. Number 2, have some data and proof points to be able to verify. So, like in my case with Threeplex, we had all kinds of metrics that made us think that the story was successful. But in the end, if you looked at pipeline conversion, the revenue metrics and the leading indicators that would feed into that, you'd go, okay, guess what? It turns out that the SaaS TMS for 3PLs is something that people love, but they're not spending real money on. And there was more money being spent on the drayage management system. So, let's figure out how to listen to that, see it early, and then make changes early. So I think the ability to know what's working and what isn't, to have a good bullshit filter for the business, for yourself, for the people around you is vital. And then I think the third is, don't be afraid to make changes. I think we all think we're all kind of prisoners of our own experience. And if you're a founder and you tell the narrative, and the narrative is we're the best at X and this is what we're doing, great. But if it turns out that X isn't the thing that the market values so much, you might think in your mind, oh, I can't change this because that's the talk track I've had for the last year. Well, in the end, nobody really cares about your talk track more than you do. And it's much more important that you get it right than that you have this, what Emerson called the foolish consistency, right? The hobgoblin of small minds is a foolish consistency. And so instead of being a prisoner to that consistency, just be prepared to make changes. I mean, listen, I'll give you one example of a company that we're working with that I'm proud to be a part of, and that's Greenscreens. Greenscreens AI does predictive pricing for truck brokerage. In some ways, Greenscreens is getting right the things that I got wrong 23 years ago with Threeplex, okay? Because it's software that helps 3PLs compete more effectively. And what they do is they go to 3PLs and truck brokers in particular, and they say, look, using our software, you can do a much better job of figuring out what the right price should be. So you've got a truckload of freight going from Chicago to New York. Your legacy system says the price should be X, but it turns out that there's a 20% error rate in those legacy systems. And if you're a truck broker and you've got a 14% margin, 20% error rate means you're pricing at a loss an awful lot of the time. Well, that's terrifying when you actually realize that you're in a transactional business, and sometimes your transactions are actively lighting your money on fire. So what Green Screens does is they say, we'll take your data, we'll feed it to our algorithms, AI-powered algorithms, and we will be able to tell you with enough data, because you train the algorithms over time, you can cut that error rate down by 75%. So as a result, you can have more accurate pricing that allows you to quote with confidence, push decision making into the front lines, and allow you to get more transactions done at a higher margin. And so, your average truck broker that's using green screens, can be saving, I don't know, $5 million plus just by getting the pricing right. So it's a big deal. And if you're going to save $5 million plus, are you willing to spend 10% of that in order to ensure that you're getting that benefit? Yeah, that's pretty easy to justify. So green screens is crushing it. But 2 years ago, when it all started, and I was involved in co-founding it, was nothing like that. We struggled. We made a lot of mistakes. One of the mistakes was we had too many different products. Another was that we were confusing the market. Another was that we had another business that was actually a digital truck broker, which was competing with the very customers that could have been using the software. So we had all kinds of challenges. But what did we do? We pivoted, we simplified, we separated from the digital broker, made it a pure standalone business. We got rid of some of the other product lines. We really narrowed down to the area where we saw people really valued what we were doing, which was on the predictive pricing side. Then we looked at the team and we realized that we were missing somebody who could run product management, who understood the transportation technology side inside and out. A woman named Dawn Salvucci-Favier, who had run product management at 3G TMS, fantastic. We recruited her to come on board. She was running that. We continued to be looking for someone that we thought, as my co-founder said, was the iconic CEO, and interviewed a lot of people. It turned out, by the way, that the right CEO was sitting there right in front of us. It was Dawn. And we ended up promoting her, and she stepped up and did a great job. And guess what? A couple of other moves along the way. But that business this year is on track to grow close to 5x. It's approaching cash flow positive. And so, but we didn't get there because we were geniuses, and we didn't get there because we were perfect. We got there because we made a lot of mistakes. We learned from the mistakes. We pivoted quickly, and we applied those lessons learned. So in a lot of ways, the things that I did wrong the first time allowed me to help other companies be more successful this time around. And so that's a long-winded way of saying that an entrepreneur that's willing to be introspective and look at what's working and what isn't will always be more successful.
Yeah, you bring up such amazing points that everyone kind of talks about in the market, but show the examples of what they actually mean, right? So everyone talks about product market fit, or the concept of pivot or persevere, right? And what does it really take to pivot or persevere, right? Do I keep charting the path, or is there enough data for me to be able to pivot? Even in the previous conversation, you mentioned about the difference between sales and marketing, and you kind of bring that subject about that message market fit, right? Does your message really resonate, right? Yes, you got a great message. Everyone loves it. You get 1,000 LinkedIn likes, right? And you are getting 2,000 visitors a day. But if it's not converting to revenue, you got a problem, right? So that's an amazing way of putting it on what the market should be expecting. Just to pivot a little bit on the subject, no pun intended. You are pretty much the OG in the investment space in the logistics environment, right? You were the kind of, you've been doing it for a while, but if my math is correct, around 21, 22 years in the investment side of things, either on the advisory or actually doing it. It wasn't sexy back then, right? To do logistics investment, you gave us that anecdote about when you had 3PL Flex, it's what's 3PL, right? You get to today's day and age where it is kind of sexy. And we all kind of sat on the sidelines and watched the kind of investments over the past 5 to 7 years that came into this space. Where do you think it's going? Because up until the beginning of this year, everything was good. As the market's turning, there are a lot of institutional investment that's in here right now, where I like to say chickens come into roost, right? Like if you cannot value a 3PL, right, at the foundation of a 3PL at, I'm just going to hyperbole, but, 20x your top line, like it doesn't make sense, right? And the reality is kind of hitting us. What do you think is happening to the market, and where does the investment side of things go in this space, right? And you probably watched on some of these things on the sidelines because you're like, this makes no sense.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. OG just probably means I'm old, but I used to be the youngest guy at everything. I don't know how this happened. You can, sure, I'm sure
It's
you guys.
just the original gangster in this space, right? Yeah.
I appreciate that. Listen, I think one thing that's different today, I guess I kind of look at this as we've gone through 3 chapters. Chapter 1, nobody knew what the hell logistics was in the venture world. Nobody knew what a 3PL was. Supply chain was not really something that people talked about. Certainly, if you brought it up at a cocktail conversation, you were probably not the star of the party, and so like these were just different parallel worlds. Then I would say chapter 2, the growth in the importance of logistics and supply chain in technology, in the economy, in the venture world. We've seen this gradually building over the last decade in particular. Probably peaking in the last year, where all of a sudden everybody knows what supply chain is. I have neighbors. I have a neighbor who runs a $7 billion construction company, and he stopped me and said, "Hey Ben, I need to understand, like, why is the supply chain ruining my business?" And it's like, you know. You don't really want to be known as the guy that's ruining somebody else's business or the industry that's ruining somebody else's business. But the fact is, look, this is a guy who builds large stadiums or embassies or other major projects worldwide. You have one shortage of one product from one place, and it holds up the whole thing. I mean, we've seen this in the car industry with the semiconductor shortage. I mean, I'll bet most people didn't even know semiconductors were an important part of the car industry until the last 2 years. So like we've been in this, we're kind of in peak supply chain awareness, and that has coincided with peak valuations in supply chain. But now we're in this 3rd chapter, okay? And the 3rd chapter is the interest is still high, the valuations, well, not only for supply chain, but just for the economy, everything has come down. To give you a tangible data point, if you look at the realm of software as a service, okay, SaaS, if you take the basket of the publicly traded companies in SaaS, whether they're supply chain or otherwise, a year ago, that industry, that category was trading at about 23 times revenue for the highest growth companies, okay, which is a staggering number. It's certainly staggering for for the OGs in this industry. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But on the other hand, today, that same index is down to 8 times forward revenue, okay? 8 times. So the multiples have come down like 2/3 for the basket of SaaS. Now, supply chain is not immune to that, and so that same trend in shift for high growth software, high growth SaaS overall, is true for supply chain too. But on the other hand, look, I would say that Bill Gurley, the venture capitalist, said there's never a better time to start a company than now, and I think that's true because look, if you have a good idea and you know how to solve a problem, and you're going to have less competition, okay, fine. Your valuation's lower today than it would have been a year ago, but is that really the key motivator? I mean, hopefully the key motivator isn't, well, what am I worth on my first, second, third financing? The key motivator is, can I solve an important problem, build something great, and in the long run, will I be rewarded for that? And if that's how you think about it, as opposed to being a quick buck artist, hey, it's a great time. Will valuations remain lower for a period of time? Yeah. How long? Don't know. But as long as that's not your primary metric, fine. Now, probably not the best time to be selling if this is the end of a 10-year journey. Maybe it's going to be an 11 or 12 or 13-year journey, right? Or maybe for the right fit and the right deal, a sale still makes sense because there are other factors. But bottom line is, look, I think markets are down, valuations are down, amounts of funding are down. But that doesn't mean that A, deals aren't happening, B, financings aren't happening, and C, that it doesn't still make sense as an entrepreneur to go for it. I think it's still a great time to go for it.
And maybe, Ben, just to kind of scratch the surface on one segment of the market that did get a lot of investment dollars over the past couple of years is what's known as quick commerce or micro fulfillment. And specifically with quick commerce, where you place an order on an app and you have a coffee, panini, bag of chips, whatever you want delivered in 20 or 30 minutes. So we saw, some pretty massive rounds take place in the last 24 months, hundreds of millions of dollars. And we see those companies in the last 6 months start doing some potential layoffs, condensing their network, their physical infrastructure. So would just love to hear your thoughts on, and again, it really ties back to what you said. I mean, you have to listen to the customer and you have to listen to the market. Is the market taking us, are consumers taking us somewhere where getting something delivered at our door in 30 minutes is something we want and need? And does it make sense for continued investment in that segment of the logistics space?
Yeah, so great question. And look, if you remember Webvan, back 22, 23 years ago, Webvan, in some respects, was one of the first massively overfunded logistics technology ideas that made sense until you took the idea and went too far with it. So Webvan was fundamentally saying, hey, we're going to set up fulfillment centers in major markets so that we could do rapid delivery, whether it wasn't within 30 minutes at the time. Same day was a big leap at the time. And it was hugely capital intensive. And people remembered it as one of those, dot-com busts. But what's interesting is if you actually looked at the mature markets, in other words, like if they started with New York, okay, a year and a half later, New York was profitable. The problem wasn't that it didn't work. The problem was that there was so much of a capital expense in adding new markets. And they went and added, 40 or 50 new markets at a time. And they probably should have just done 2 or 3 or 4. And had they simply slowed the pace, it would have worked. So sometimes you have businesses where you're solving a real problem and the unit economics can work, but the capital intensity up front is just too big. And if you go too big too fast and the capital markets change, then you're screwed. I think that has been a problem for companies in the micro fulfillment center because those same patterns then hold true today. And so, look, is there a need to have 30-minute delivery of anything that's not a medical emergency? No, of course there isn't. Is the consumer willing to pay a premium for 30-minute delivery versus 6-hour delivery? I personally am skeptical. I think we've probably overshot on that. But it doesn't mean that infrastructure investment can't lead to success. But it does mean, coming back to our prior point, pivot. And so the companies that were trying to do that, hey, maybe the strategy should be just do that in a couple of markets and be a hell of a lot more profitable by building up density. And so if you have a high degree of density in 4 or 5 markets, then you become the leader in whatever, New York, Boston, DC, et cetera. And then if somebody else does that in the Southeast, somebody else on the West Coast, guess what? Eventually there should be a consolidation and those companies should merge. That makes a hell of a lot more sense than everybody, having this race to the bottom and overbuilding infrastructure in every single market. That just doesn't make sense to do that.
Makes sense. Another example within this space, right? Startups where we see a lot of noise is in the robotic automation space, Ben, right? Like, it almost feels like every other day I'm on a call with a new company in the robotic automation space. And it's a bit crowded. It's capital intensive, right? Like what you're trying to sell, you're not trying to sell a SaaS solution at $100,000 per year. You're trying to sell something that's, potentially millions of dollars. And so many companies out there today. Where do you think that space is going? Or do you see consolidation within that space? Do you see, some of these companies going away? What is happening? And, if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have any portfolio investments within the robotic investment space, right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that most of what we've invested in is either software or services, because it's easier to scale. Right? I mean, you take a software company like Green Screens, you get one thing right. I mean, they're growing 5x. really hard to do that. Really hard to do that in any business, particularly one that's capital intensive. Having said that, we like robotics, we like automation, and certainly, we're interested and we'd love to find the right company. I think there are a couple of challenges and a couple of opportunities in robotics. One challenge is capital intensity, which means you could end up spending a lot of money for a long time before getting the meaningful revenue that of course really matters. And two is there's the question of IP. Because ultimately, as an example, there are successful robotics companies. Kiva's done great, Grey Orange is doing great, et cetera. But if you're competing against a Chinese robotics company, and there's risk of IP theft or IP competition, they're just a whole series of layers of challenge to that. And then lastly, there's adoption, adoption has been slower than most of the robotics companies that I've looked at had wanted or expected. On the other hand, the opportunity is huge. The opportunity is huge because one, there's so much expensive labor, and the labor is getting more expensive. I have a friend who runs a business focused on robotics and automation, and he's a Republican, and so it shocked me when he said that the best thing for his business was the Biden administration. And I said, why? And he said, well, this was like a year and a half ago. He said, because all this talk about increasing minimum wage and increasing labor costs. He said, guess what? It means that our customers look at the substitution of what we do for what they currently have to do, and that rising expense, and they go, hell, the substitution effect means that robotics automation becomes that much more important. Little did all of us know that would be overtaken by this wage inflation spiral of the last year, and it turns out that the free market was driving costs up a lot more than than those mandatory minimum wage levels were. But the point is, as it gets more and more expensive to run a business, as labor rates get more expensive, as some of the things that the NLRB doing, which make unionization a greater risk. You see companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and others wrestling with this. It just makes the substitution of labor for automation that much more compelling. So, look, I think in the long term, there's no doubt that robotics and automation in the warehouse is a macro theme, and you'll see companies that are really successful doing it. The question is, how do you make sure that the huge capital expenditure required to build that pays off? And it may well be kind of like my example of threeplex versus green screens, that instead of going for the huge answer, that there are a couple of point solutions that are more cost effective that get you there first, where you build traction. And so I'm still very much interested in looking for the robotics and automation companies that are doing that.
Makes sense. And just a side note, anecdote on that side as well. Before we started Fulfillment IQ, I was thinking about what should I work on, and I had this robotic idea on the hardware side, and I knew a founder that had recently exited on the robotic automation side of things, and I kind of reached out for advice. And the one advice he gave me was like, don't do it. I was like, why? He's like, it's so expensive to do robotics that the amount of investment that you need to raise, by the time I exited, I didn't have much of the company left for me, right? Like it's comparing it to SaaS versus like a hardware company as well, the R&D is much, much, much more expensive. In SaaS, you need good engineer, good people, you could go do it. But there is some really impressive automation technologies that have been emerging out in the market, and I think they're going to duke it out over the next couple of years. It's going to be fairly interesting to see.
Definitely.
So Ben, when we look at your portfolio, and you just had a recent investment in the past several weeks in the cold storage space, you've also been in the tech-enabled reverse logistics space, just to name a few of the segments of the logistics space you're playing in. When you talk about the fact that supply chain wasn't like what made you famous at a party a couple years ago, you've picked a couple areas that I think were craving good technology, and they were kind of the the back corner items. I think from a cold storage perspective today, we're still talking with brands and merchants that are looking for a good solution. Or, if they're not a Fortune 500 company, if they're a startup or mid-market brand, they're looking for a really quality national cold storage solution. And in reverse logistics, I mean, with what happened over the past couple years, it's just a numbers game. It's just easy math. The more that goes out, the more that's going to come back. So, as you were kind of just, obviously doing a bunch of due diligence and you're talking to a lot of founders and leaders in the space, what attracted you to those segments, and, why were those the areas you decided to make some investments?
Sure. Well, with BOA in the cold chain arena, I mean, BOA's a great example of several things that we care about. So we basically start top down and say, where are some areas where there are great tailwinds? So growth of e-commerce, that means subsequent areas of logistics, e-commerce fulfillment, last mile, returns, like those are all macro themes. Another macro theme, of course, is growth in food, which is recession resistant. We all have to eat, good times and bad. Maybe you're more likely to have a bowl of salad than a steak, but you got to eat. So cold chain or pharmaceutical logistics, for that matter, macro trend. Then a second thing that we look for is business that's getting real traction that has a compelling solution. In the case of BOA, they really pioneered LTL consolidation in the food arena for brands, starting with Hispanic food brands, but now much broader mix into restaurants, retailers, et cetera. Third, we look for businesses that have proof points of success, and it shows up in revenue, margin, growth, and BOA's done a fantastic job and has grown from nothing to a major company over the last decade. Fourth, we typically prefer to work with entrepreneurs, founders. It's just it's different from buying a business or investing in a business that's a venture backed or led or private equity backed or led business, because that direct relationship with the founder is important. We're founders too, and that, I think, rapport, ability to help, ability to understand their journey and make an impact is all very relevant. And then lastly, a deal. We look for a deal that makes sense. We pay full, fair prices. Our goal is not to, buy on the cheap, but on the other hand, we also don't want to overpay. We want to pay a fair price for a great business, typically in partnership with management. In all of our deals, that's the case. So like BOA, the management team still owns a very large equity stake in the company. And we're partners with them for the next chapter of growth of the business. And so that's what we're excited about with BOA. I think it illustrates a lot of the things that we're super bullish on. Flying out to LA next week to see him and spend time with them, and I think that's great. But kind of green screens and BOA are two ends of the spectrum. Green screens, early stage, venture backed, high growth software. BOA, more mature company, services business, can use technology, but fundamentally they're providing a service in the food industry, larger, later stage, more mature. But in both cases, it's working with great people, building an outstanding business in a category that's got tailwinds where we can make an impact.
So maybe for our entrepreneurs and founders out there, I think going back to how you got into the space as an entrepreneur, as a founder, someone who started multiple companies. For those that are, and you've seen, I don't know, probably hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of pitch decks along the way. So, you've given so many awesome nuggets pertaining to what you look for. Maybe how could you kind of put that in words for a founder that's maybe looking to raise for the first time, or maybe trying to raise outside of friends and family and looking for some institutional support? What are the things they should be thinking about? Maybe putting on your entrepreneurial hat for the first step, and then your investor hat for the second step.
What are things they should be thinking about? So if I'm a founder and whether it's raising money or building the business, there are two different things. It's interesting to note, there's actually a pretty active discussion around these topics on Twitter. It's not just a place for I don't know, exploding kittens and other distractions. And somebody I follow likened it to the dopamine hit of raising money. And there is a dopamine hit when you know go, all right, I put together a pitch, I convinced somebody to invest, they came and joined me on my journey, and they put their money where their mouth is. But the reality is way more important to figure out how to grow the business and win customers and scale up than it is to get that short-term dopamine hit. But either way, it starts with the same thing, which is if you're an entrepreneur looking to raise money, I mean, I think number one, got to have a clear pitch, got to be able to tell the story, elevator style, 30 seconds. A lot of entrepreneurs, the story takes too long and you lose the audience's attention. Got to be able to have the hook in 30 seconds, and that's one. Two is it's not just a story. There's also the substance, which is a proof point of success. I get a lot of decks, and generally speaking, the ones that I'm the most interested in are ones where the deck shows a simple statement of what's the problem, what's their solution, customer case study, and clear results for how they help. And I think that's vital. Third is, be direct about the financials. I think people tend to sometimes think, oh, I just want to tell the story, and then I'll bring it up on a second call or a second presentation. Well, all that does certainly for me, and I think for most other investors, is you go, okay, I got to go ask these other 3 qualifying questions before I can know whether this is something that makes sense or not. So knowing how big's the business, what's the revenue, how much are you looking for, what do you think you can do with it? Getting to that point quickly is important, and an entrepreneur might think that he or she is controlling the narrative and being more effective somehow that way. It's not the case. Just much better to get to the key things that the person on the other side needs to know. And then the fourth is, I think, show a genuine willingness to listen, knowing that you might not have you don't have all the answers, and it might be that the person on the other side has useful suggestions. I think even the investors that aren't smart money want to think they're smart money, so you don't lose anything by listening, and who knows, you might end up with some great ideas that you pick up. So I think that's important. And look, there's some arrogance and hubris in the venture world, and most VCs think they're really smart and think that they're smarter than the entrepreneurs, and it's usually not the case. But it's almost always the case that a smart entrepreneur can learn something from a discussion with an investor. Maybe that investor adds real value, maybe they don't. But listening, partly because you might learn something, and partly because the other guy or gal appreciates that, it certainly it makes a huge difference. So to me, those are 4 things that, as an entrepreneur raising capital, you should be thinking about.
And are there anything that's you would call out, just don't do it? Because that's when Ben goes, within the first 30 seconds, goes, I'm not investing in this. I'm walking away.
Well, look, I think one is the credibility. Like when someone says, well, this is a huge market, and the focus is on some top-down calculation. I mean, top-down is kind of bullshit, right? Top-down, I'm inventing a way to automate supply chain, and supply chain's $1 trillion market, and if all I do is get 1% of the market, I'm a $10 billion company, and I've gotten a bunch of those, and so just be reasonable, be credible, be bottoms up and fact based. I think that's one. I think 2 is humility, right? I think understanding the entrepreneurs that I love usually recognize the things that they don't know. They don't come in and insist that they know more than anybody else and denigrate their competitors, or otherwise imply that they know something that everybody else doesn't. I remember seeing one pitch that was really for a digital freight broker, and it had a few slides showing it was Vinny the broker. And it was basically trying to show what their view was of your average truck broker, that they were arguing was kind of a scummy guy who is double brokering and doing things, overcharging you, but you didn't know it. And it was, sort of like, look, Vinny the broker might or might not be based on a real person, but, if your premise is based on insulting your competition, it's usually not a great start. And then look, the third is unwillingness to share. I mean, I think, look, again, I've been a founder multiple times. I remember going through a VC process and not answering questions the first time because I thought, oh, well, that's confidential. The reality is, we all overestimate the importance of confidentiality. I mean, because so much of this business is about executing. And so, yeah, if you've got a patent for something proprietary and you don't want to expose, the patent, or you don't want to expose the secret sauce, fine. But the reality is, most of what most companies do is not as proprietary as we think. I think we tend to overweight the IP side and underweight the execution side. And I think, people that say, oh, I can't talk about that, or I can't tell you about that, it usually is a sign that they're spending energy on the wrong things. Not always, but most of the time. So those are 3 watch-outs.
That's a really good advice, Ben. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, Ben, we would just first of all like to thank you. This has been an amazing conversation, and want to give you the opportunity to share with the audience the best way where they could learn more about you, maybe follow you on social media, and how to check out Cambridge Capital.
Great. Well, Dan, thank you, and really enjoyed the discussion. Dan, with both of you, you asked a lot of great questions, and I hope my answers measured up. As far as how to reach me, I'm very easy to reach. You can email me, ben@cambridgecapital.com. If you go to the cambridgecapital.com site, you'll see we practice what we preach in terms of being open and transparent. You'll see more about our strategy, our portfolio, our team, what we look for, case studies, and a whole bunch of other content. I write a lot on LinkedIn. You can certainly find me there. It handles Ben Gordon 18, or Twitter as well, handles Benjamin H. Gordon. By the way, be an early adopter for new technology so you can get the same handle for everything. I was not fast enough. And then look, one other thing that I want to add for those in the audience that are listening. We also have done a lot of work on the humanitarian side. One of our companies, Everest, used to have 150 employees in Ukraine. After Russia invaded Ukraine on Feb 24, we had to get involved first, evacuating everybody that wanted and needed evacuating. Now with an office in Krakow, Poland. But then secondly, we started the Ukraine Logistics Coalition. We brought in over $20 million of medical supplies into Ukraine. That's been helped by the generosity of many logistics companies who have agreed to provide free transport on the air and ground side, so that somebody that has medical supplies to donate can take advantage of that free passage and make sure that every dollar of value gets there. So certainly, to the extent that there are people listening that would like to help donating medical supplies, first aid kits, or otherwise, you can do that by donating money or by donating supplies. You can reach me through the places that I've described. You can also go to logisticscoalition.org to see more on that. So reach out to me at Cambridge Capital or at the Ukraine Logistics Coalition. And certainly, if you'd like to help on the humanitarian side, or if you know great companies, or your own company is a great company and you are interested in talking about a deal or financing or otherwise, I'd love to hear from you.
Ben, that's phenomenal. I was not aware. I'll personally say that, and that's a massive service to a very worthy cause. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Well, we all have a role to play, so doing my best. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.